Welcome. As you all know, I'm Andy Hansen, IOE Director, and Jason Pigner is the Program Director to organize the series. Real pleasure to welcome Elizabeth, the speaker today. He has long been professor in the political science department. It's been 3 or 4 years or so. He's been assistant vice president for research development. In that regard, supervises does so in a way that has been wonderfully supportive, really allowed the program to grow and flourish. So for that, we her. Her research deals with risk assessment, type of risk assessment that she's been pioneering called comparative risk communication. That she's published widely in this kind of approach. And I look forward to us sharing more about that with us today. She recently was appointed to the National Academy of Public Administration. She's equivalent to the National Academy of Sciences, a high-profile position for which speaks to her accomplishments. In that regard, she often says she enjoys associations, but is getting worked awfully hard in that position. Thanks for taking the time and your busy schedule to speak with us today.
You bet.
So please go ahead.
All right, awesome. So Andy Madison asked me to give this talk, and the talk was called, what is it called now, you guys? Perspectives of Senior Scientists. And I was like, what does that mean? Scientists. So I'm not giving a traditional science talk. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my trajectory and then high-level findings across career in terms of my science. But I am going to tell you a little bit about the trajectory, and I'm doing that because it has a lot to do with IOE. So the science of stories, finding possibility in the improbable. So I'm going to start with the improbable. I went to Dartmouth. I was a comparative literature major, classic liberal arts. What did I do with that degree? I was a C-bum in Jackson Hole for some number of years. I was really good and smart waitress. I decided I needed to get serious with my career. For various reasons, I was geographically bound. I went to Idaho State University for a couple different degrees, and I landed a job here. So I went from a third-tier institution. I mean, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but you know, in terms of Carnegie, to Montana State. Got some funding. Got this big job in Montana Hall, National Academy. It's an improbable story. Happen. Finding possibilities. It really was the IOE, and it was advanced. That really was 2 of my launching pads. So let me start with the IOE, of course, Kathy. Early on, when we got the EPSCoR money, and she got the EPSCoR money and established IOE, she asked me this question: what can you do, or what can we do to help you in the research? And it seems so simple, you guys. What can we do to help? You cannot ask that question enough of people, your colleagues, of your superiors, and of your students. And you know what my response was? A computer. I mean, it was pretty darn simple, and it helped. But Kathy also set up IOE as an institute, as a structure, and she created opportunities for collaboration that now we have a fancy term called collision events. So finding possibilities. This was my first team. This was my first NSF grant. It was on flooding in eastern Montana. This is the IOE, my IOE team. I would never have met this team without the IOE. Yeah, very successful in terms of pubs. Also, I'm going to give a nod to Advanced, Jesse Smith, and of course, Raina, who is a disease ecologist. She has left MSU for Cornell, but I met her through Advance. We have a bunch of publications, or a few publications there. So thinking about IOE, I think we need to think about IOE as, you know, our intellectual home. It was for me for a long time. So now the improbable story of stories, this is more about my work, right? I'm going to give you some context, the petri dish I grew up in. So political science, we're a social science, but truly, Dorland knows this, in the 50s, Yale Department of Government walked around in the 50s in lab coats. So there's this very strong belief in political science that to be a political scientist, you have, you know, you follow the rational model and, you know, tell me how good we are at predicting voting, right? But this is the culture in political science. It is very male dominated. It is very quantitative. It's very, I would call like predictive rational, right? So in terms, and public policy and public administration are, in most political science departments are subfields. So you can have political theory, you can have institutions like presidency, Congress, and public policy, public administration. So there's this science of public policy, and then there's the art of public policy. There are different ways to approach public policy, and they are at odds in our discipline. So the science of public policy, measurable, systematized outputs. This might sound familiar to some of you who've had econ. Evaluate and measure benefits and costs. Policies motivated by rational self-interest because we are rational beings. And we must aspire to generalization, replication, and causation. And then there's this other group of folks who study policy who say, no, policy is really messy, interrelated, overlapping. Reality is socially constructed, which means that we have different perspectives. So how you define a cost or define a benefit is actually a social construction. Like what defines parts per million as pollution is socially constructed. So policy comes from all kinds of motivations, including the public interest, not just rationality. And determining causation is impossible. So we have these like huge two camps. And this is what I was raised in. And so with a narrative policy framework, so Andy was right. My work right now is really in risk communication, and but it's founded in this framework that I've developed with colleagues called the narrative policy framework. And our central question is, how do narratives influence the policy process? And so when you think about narratives, there are stories. It sounds very much like the art of public policy, but what we have done is that we have taken narratives and we have quantified them. So we look at ourselves as a bridge between these ridiculously warring camps that don't need to be warring. In terms of ontology and epistemology kinds of questions. So Mike Jones on the left and Mark Macbeth on the right, and I are the three who've really put this together, the narrative policy framework. There's a ton of people who are picking this up at this point, and the reason why it has just become like wildfire across the globe is that stories are everywhere. They're in the media, they're in newsletters, they're online, they're in blogs. We are really in information overload, I would say, but also in this primordial soup of stories. And it is hard to suss out what's real, what's not, what you believe, what you don't believe. But it's free. Our data generally are free. So it's partly why we've taken off, and we're systematic, we're replicable. We have how to do the narrative policy framework methods. So a little bit of background, I'm going to fly through this. Why are stories or narratives so important? It's because stories help us make sense of the world around us. Stories help us make sense of the world around us. We've all been raised with stories, Aesop's fables, religious texts. The media also helps to make sense of events in the world. I'd be saying, isn't policy development based on evidence though? Like, I don't want it to be based on stories. Yeah, it's true. For the most part, policies are evidence-based. So you have COVID policies informed by science. But some policies are not evidence-based, and I don't need to say much more here, right? They're not. They're value-based. So the nature of policy debates. Policy debates are often about uncertainties and evidence for science. So this is a flood map, a FEMA flood map of Billings. We've got cutouts. We've had much debate over what is flooding, what does a 100-year floodplain mean. Policy debates are often about uncertainties and what goes into a flood map, but policy debates are also about values, right? Who we are, what we believe, right smack dab in the middle of this right now, right to choose, the right to life. So bringing a little bit of political science here, the power of stories and policy development. So when you think about the founding, the colonial founding of this country, this debate on what our Constitution is happened on narrative terrain, right? You have the Federalist Papers. People were saying why we should, ratify this Constitution. The Anti-Federalist Papers, they were meant to be stories to persuade, yay or nay, right? So we debate in order to persuade others that our perspective, policy solution, in this case, the Constitution. So we debate in order to persuade others that our perspective is right or the best. And that form of persuasion happens in story form. It can be evidence-based. It can have evidence in that story, but it's oftentimes in story form. So what makes a story? The anatomy of a story. Story has form or structure, and this is really important. It seems so basic, but it's really important, and it's why we're able to be systematic. And so I come from a comp lit background, so I'm able to bring some of these structural understandings to policy. So stories have characters, plots, which are characters and actions, and some sort of moral to the story. And there's more, there's settings, etc. And so the science of stories, the narrative policy framework, what we do is that we take this form or this structure, and we're agnostic to the policy. We can analyze the policy debates, the stories that are going on, looking at how different characters are arrayed. What are the different values that these characters are portraying, and why policy debates are so intractable at times. So the science of stories is the systematic studies of how narratives influence the policy process, and that systematic study, in part, is based on story form. And so in terms of ontology and epistemology and us being this bridge between like the science of policy and the art of policy, our work, the narrative policy framework, captures subjective meaning making, right? So stories are meaning making devices. So we subjectively make meaning. So we capture that subjectivity objectively. So stories are subjectively put together, your character array, a plot, like who is the hero, who's the villain, how they interact. That provides meaning, that's structured, it tells a story, gives meaning, and that is subjective, but we objectively measure it through understanding and how these structures are arrayed across different stories. Just for your own understanding, when we think about policy, there are stages of the policy process or policy making. A lot of what we focus on in the narrative policy framework is that top, the problem definition and agenda setting. So when we have something that happens in society, some problem, there's usually stakeholders that come together that say that this is what we want to see happen, and they work to build stories to persuade people to support their story, to persuade legislators or decision makers. But narratives happen at all stages of the policy process. Which is another talk. So the science of stories, the NPF. My work particularly has been focused on, as Andy said, narrative risk communication. So we look at the effect of risk messages on cognition. And so the idea for me in my work has been to understand narratives from a mechanistic perspective. So what is it in this narrative structure, the mechanisms of stories that are indeed influential, that nudge people into engaging in some kind of risk reduction behavior. So this is going to fly by what I'm about to, this is, like 15 years of work and 7 slides, like that. But what have we discovered, right, over time? Well, characters matter, especially the hero character. So this is a study I did. This was Anne-Marie and Jeff and those guys. So I'm going to spend a bit of time here. On the left, you'll see it's called a perception analyzer. So what we did is that we had a room full of people, and they had this perception analyzer, and they both read and heard different risk flooding in eastern Montana. Like what they heard, they turned the dial to the right, and that the red numbers, where it says 57, the red numbers go up. They don't like what they're hearing, or if they have a negative response, the dial went down. And so in that first frame where it says flood definition, you can see a legend there. Conventional, victim, hero, victim to hero. We had 4 treatments. So the conventional was just, was non-narrative, just science. The victim, hero, and victim to hero, it was like Mad Libs, right? We situated different heroes. The audience as victim, the audience as hero, or the audience as victim to hero in this flood scenario. And so what we did in these 4 treatment conditions is that it was divided up into 4 sections. So the first section of each treatment had the same flood definition. The second section had problem framing, also the same. So, the definition, flooding is, flooding, I can't remember what the definition was. Flooding occurs when there's water on, on a surface area, something like that. Jeff did it, so it was right. And the problem framing was, and it's a problem for you, potentially for you and your community. And then the next was the science, which was magnitude and probability. And then the last was we introduced characters. So we situated the audience in this story as the victim of flooding, as the hero to fix the problem, or as the victim and the hero to fix the problem. And so as you can see, flood definition, 4 conditions, people generally like, yeah, flooding, flood, we agree with that. The second part of the problem framing, there's no statistical difference there. So everyone was like, yeah, okay, yeah, flooding's a problem. Look what happens to science. Look what happens to science. Every single condition, people turned that dial down. So this gave us a ton of impetus to really go after conventional science communication in contrast to narrative risk communication. We need our science, but we have to meet people where they are, and we have to talk about our science in a way that resonates with people. And look what happens when we introduce characters. Like, things went bananas, right? And what happened was that when you have just a victim, it was just sort of like, sort of flat to down. But when you situate people as the solvers of the problem, people want to do something. And people responded really positively. So this study gave us a lot of excitement, and so characters matter. Images matter. This is my postdoc. This is in the realm of infectious disease. I'm not going to go into a lot of this is a survey experiment. We kept the image, we made fake Facebook posts. It was not on Facebook. It was not on Facebook. This was in a survey. We made it look like a Facebook posting. We had text, we had image, and without going into the details, we kept the image steady, obviously. So bats are reservoir hosts for these zoonotic viruses in Australia. People love bats, people hate bats. It's pretty controversial in Australia. And what we found, bottom line is that images matter. Images will intensify emotions. So when you are communicating your science using images. We also found that the process is nonlinear. I had this amazing team in COVID of a bunch of policy scholars and public health folks. We got together, trauma bonded in COVID time. And we did this also a survey experiment. So here, as you can see, we're using very simple images. We have a control, which is non-narrative. Get the vaccine. This is what we did in COVID, right? Wear a mask. Stay socially distant. They were imperatives. They were not stories, right? So this is, we were launching this at a time of the COVID vaccine was being deployed and then was deployed. So we were able to get to actual behavior. So the control condition was just get the vaccine. And we held that constant across our across our treatment conditions. The call to action, get the vaccine. We know that heroes are really important. So heroes who protect, we situate the audience as a hero. So we kept that constant. And what we varied was the victim. Who are we protecting? Protect yourself, protect your circle, protect your community. Fully expected in the American context that we would have protect yourself. We had what was statistically significant in contrast to the control was your circle. And so let me go back to that. The process is nonlinear. So let me walk you through this a little bit. This nonlinear process. Affect matters. So we consider affect or an emotional response to the treatment as this transportation. And narrative transportation is a concept in and of itself. And you all experience this when you go to the movies where you actually like lose your whole body, like you're just in it. And you're usually in it and following the movie because you are really identifying with a character or characters in the plot and you are emotionally engaged. Like sometimes you cry, sometimes you get scared. So narrative transportation is really important in terms of measuring the power of narratives. And so we do this via affect. So, and I'll show you the model in just a second, but the other part of this nonlinear process is intention to do something in advance of doing something. So this is our process model. So the X was these conditions. We did have some direct effects, but they're really hard to detect. And what we found was this, it's called a serial mediation effect, where when people had a strong affective response to the message and they were motivated and to receive, they tended to follow through and get the COVID-19. This one. Now, this is a study that I'm working on right now. We're going to submit it to Lancet, which is like a super high reach for any social scientist. And I'm nervous and excited about it. So this is a little bit more detail because this is where my head's at right now. So number 4, what have we learned? How problems are defined matters, or called problem definition. So I'm going to walk through this a little bit more. The problem definitions are stories about a preferred policy solution, and they're causal stories. So, well, actually, I have it right here. Narrative elements. what's new in this is that we say that we can understand and we can deconstruct a problem definition narratively. So when you think about a problem definition, you have some policy issue is happening because of some villain, and some victim is suffering as a result. And so we must do whatever the policy solution is. So so SARS-CoV-2, so COVID-19 pandemic started because of the sale of virus-carrying animals in wet markets. And people got sick as a result. So we must regulate animal trade. And I'm not saying this is correct. I'm saying this was a problem definition. SARS-CoV-2 pandemic occurred because of exchanges in infected airborne particles at gatherings such as religious, school, and social events. And people got sick as a result. So we must stay home and wear masks. The reason why problem definitions are so important is because how you define a problem will delineate your problem, your solution set. How you define a problem will delineate your set. So if you define COVID-19 as, as sick animals, then we're going to regulate the animals. So in Australia, one of the there are a group of people who want to just get rid of bats, because bats are reservoir hosts for lyssavirus, for Hendra, potentially for COVID. We don't know, that hasn't been fully determined yet. So problem definitions are really important. So this is there's Raina. This is what I've been doing lately, working on zoonotic viruses in Australia. I have an amazing team. And Raina and as a disease ecologist, they've come up with this infect, shed, spill, that's not right, infect, shed, spill, shed, infect, shed, spill, it's supposed to say spread. So what does it mean in terms of pandemics, right? So we have this, what happens before the pandemic. We have abiotic, biotic, and anthropogenic drivers, right? In this infect shed dynamics. And then we have these bridging hosts, usually domestic animals. And there's a spillover, there can be a spillover to humans. And maybe it's just to one, maybe, this is where the R naught comes in. It might be to one person, it might be to one person who spreads it to two, et cetera. And so the movement right now is that, well, I should say what's currently happening is that we are really good as human beings in reacting. We're really good at responding to mitigation and saying, these are our policy outputs. This is what we need to do. We're really terrible at prevention. And there are really well-studied reasons for this. One is called the present bias. So you just get a bigger, more immediate return on mitigation than you do prevention. And that's something we don't know that actually prevented it because the problem never fully happened. So One Health, how many of you guys have heard of One Health? Oh, well, you are like 3 standard deviations from the mean. Most people, so when I gave this talk, not this talk, but gave a talk, and I was talking about this study 2 weeks ago in Boston, to 250 people, I would say maybe 10% have heard of One Health. So One Health is not known in this country. So One Health, so my team, Raina's, the lead here, they're called the Bat One Health team, And I'm like, you guys, you're just assuming like that One Health is the way to go and that people just think this is obviously such a good idea. But we should test that. Like, what do people think about One Health? Is that really powerful? So One Health it's a really big deal, One Health globally. So these big organizations have got together. This is a lot of words on this slide, but what I want you to see here is that they've gotten together. They have their very sort of, parochial interests, and they have coming together saying, in order for us to have global health, we need health in humans, we need health in animals, and we need health in the environment. And that those three sectors, humans, animals, environment, are linked and they're interdependent. And they have this in the joint action plan. And like, it's really, I can't tell you how powerful this is and potentially transformative this could be. There's a lot of work to do. There's a Lancet One Health Commission Maria's really involved with that are trying to get global agreements for like data sharing, surveillance, etc. So this is their figure out of the joint plan. And I'm saying One Health is a problem definition. And remember, why is a problem definition important? Because it delineates a problem solution set, right? So here's their figure. One Health promotes a sustainable and healthy future through collaboration, communication, coordination, and capacity building. It's way too many words. But this is the One Health, how people think about One Health. Healthy ecosystems, healthy humans, healthy animals. And I am positing that One Health is both a solution. You need to have the health in those three domains. And it's also how the problem of zoonotic spillovers is defined. Oops. Yeah. There's a ton. I'm not going to go through any of this, but I'm just listing all this because in 2023, Lancet had a series and there's so much work on this. But all that work is really focused here. Collaboration, coordination, and capacity building. And that's what I would call at the meso level. So how do local governments and agencies communicate with state, region, country to country, right? Really important work. Really important work. But what's missing is this. Where this study comes in. So why is buy-in from the people even important in the first place? Why do we care about communicating with people? People, are ill-informed, blah, blah, blah. Well, I am one who believes in the public. We have public support, public grants legitimacy. Legitimacy to agencies, to governmental institution. And that's important because when the public grants legitimacy to agencies and governmental institutions, we will consent to be governed. We'll do what you say when we think you have legitimacy. Also support financial monies going to these institutions and these efforts. And we're also motivated to address the problem. So I think that there is a propensity to ignore the public, and I'm saying we shouldn't do that. So the missing piece in my mind, that no studies have examined the effects of One Health as a problem definition. And so the problem with disease emergence is human, animal, and environment. Environmental, so, human development, population, global interconnections in terms of travel and trade. For animals, expansion of domestic animal populations and decline of wildlife. And for sure in the environment, land use change and loss of wildlife habitat. So in this study, does One Health problem definition persuade individuals to support preventative actions in contrast to mitigation? So prevention, mitigation. We created different experimental treatments. We disaggregated basically the One Health. So we had a control, which was non-narrative, just like zoonotic spillovers are a problem. And then we had a human problem definition, human wildlife problem definition, and then a One Health, human, wildlife, and environment problem definition. It was very systematic, again, kind of Mad Libsy, how we put it together. I'm not going to, don't read this. I'm just putting this up here to say that this is what it looked like. These are the ends that were assigned randomly to each condition. And we paired it with paired words with images that also built on itself, essentially. And this, because we're talking about zoonotic spillovers, we went ahead and did a 3-state survey in Australia. This is a cool prompt. Imagine you're advising a committee concerned with zoonotic spillovers. They've set aside some funds to address the problem of zoonotic spillovers and have asked you for your input for how to prioritize the following solutions. And so those colored dots below are output variables basically, but the solutions. So what percentage of their resources would you advise them to allocate to any number of the initiatives below? So it had to add up to 100. We didn't say how much. We didn't say they were tax dollars. We tried to avoid these kind of heuristic pitfalls, I would say. We had 2 reactive policies and the rest were proactive policies or policy actions, I would say. And use the scissors to do some statistical analysis, just to let you know, because I had no idea how to do this because these weren't, these are percents. And so we had to do some kind of, they did a crazy transformation so that the answers were all orthogonal. But anyway, it was a composite analysis. So One Health problem definition is persuasive. So if you look at this compared to the control, those who are exposed to the One Health condition in contrast to the control allocated more resources to prevention policy actions than mitigation, right? One Health compared to the human problem definition, same thing. Those exposed to the One Health problem definition allocated more resources to the prevention policy actions in contrast to reactive. And then One Health versus human wildlife, same thing. Less of a gap, but it was still, it looks like it touches 0, but it was significant. And all the others were non-significant. One Health as a problem definition matters to get people, to nudge people toward supporting the proactive prevention policy actions. We also checked out moderators because we all come, we're not just like Padla Rosa, right? So you get exposed to some message. We all come at it with our own biases. And so we, of course, controlled for a bunch of beliefs and risk perceptions, et cetera. But what really stuck out to me was that fatalism was a very strong moderator for a number of these policy actions. So fatalism was like basically whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I don't have any control. And those are people who the One Health message doesn't influence, right? That's okay. I mean, it's okay. We aren't going to reach everybody, but we have to know who we're talking to and what our limits are. But there were some other interactions, but fatalism was probably the strongest and the most consistent across. So really, I think kind of encouraging news with regard to One Health and that we need to learn how to communicate One Health as a problem definition. And that like, conventional science, non-narrative problem definition, the control really led to stronger reactive, right? So communicating straight science, zoonotic spillovers are a problem, is more likely to encourage mitigation strategies versus prevention strategies. And fatalism matters. All right, so going back to so the science of stories, finding possibilities in the improbable. So the science of stories, narratives matter, right? Character choice, images, problem definition. So scientific input, risk communication is pretty important in terms of being effective. So the improbable. A betting person would not have raged in my career amounting to much. Seriously, yeah, I went to Dartmouth, but I was a comp lit major. And then, I had this wild circuitous route. I was a therapist for a while and I worked on personal narratives. And then I was in Bozeman, then I went back to Idaho. I was not like a classic STEM person like my son who knew when he was 3 that he was going to be a scientist. And my doctorate is from Idaho State. And then I'm here at Montana State, which is a great institution, but we don't have a PhD program. it was just and yeah, there's more to all of that, but I have an improbable story and I'm super freaking grateful. Because it's not like me, my brain, it is like the petri dish of MSU and particularly the IOE, right? Finding the possibility, Kathy Whitlock, Andy. Early in my career, we took my first foray into interdisciplinary work. Critical opportunities that the IOE has presented for me, changed the odds, truly. Um, So I know this sounds really corny, but when I say be the hero of your story, I mean, part of it is, well, Stephanie, we were talking about this yesterday a little bit. No institution and no organization is perfect. And, I just think that being a part of the solution, it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen or that things don't go your way, but being a part of the solution is really important, I think, to success. And also, like, you're the character in other people's stories. Faculty, you're the character in your students' stories, right? And it's important to think about how are they looking at you too, and what kind of impact you have on them and what you're teaching them in terms of being the solver of their own problems, the heroes of their own stories. So I think mentoring, I know we talk about this a lot, but it really, really matters. So what's next for the MPF? I'm big data, computational work, doing this in two directions. One is as a methodological tool to basically code. We have a lot of narrative data, as I said, and it's free. But we use human filters usually, and that's really time intensive and expensive. So I'm working with someone from the Vet One Health team who's super smart on comparing human coding to it's Claude.ai and ChatGPT coding, and we're sort of knee deep in figuring that out. And I don't know Python, so I'm relying on him to do a lot of that work. But big data is the next wave, and AI, and we're also working, trying to use AI, giving it some prompts to develop risk messages, and images, which is kind of interesting. And I'm working with them better threats. So how can we communicate? There's like, if you're a big corporation like Target, and you have someone who might not be nefariously compromising your secure system, but maybe inadvertently, what kind of a message can go to someone who will actually intervene, attention, who will actually intervene. And so we're working on narrative risk communication in the cyberspace as well. And, we're in this age of, misinformation and disinformation. And so how do we situate the role of science in narratives, and how can we make sure that there's a literacy of science in these narratives? Because narratives, I've had people say, why are you doing this? I mean, you're dealing the deck to the devil. And I'm like, hey, it's happening. We might as well understand how it works so that we can have the counter narrative, right? That we can actually confront some of the woes and affairs. So this is like where I need Layla's help in science communication and the role of science in these narratives. And with the National Academy of Public Administration, so we are chartered by Congress, like the National Academy of Sciences, which means that we get to do studies for Congress. And one of the things that I want to do is help shape those questions, particularly for the West and climate change. And so my work has been really, it has been really successful by particular, academic metrics, but I want someone, I want people to, you know, more easily, I guess, in agencies, and in government and decision making. So thanks so much for inviting me. And this is obviously a bat in Australia. And they fly and they skim the water with their chest and then they lick the water off and that's how they